Hello everybody, my name's Ian Ellis and we're going to do a Great Arts to Steel, another video. We're going to be focusing on the natural greens and how we can mix them. And I suppose the question is really what do we mean when we're talking about a natural green? What I'm going to do is just show you that a lot of people consider unnatural and something that's very natural. I've got here viridian green, and the colour I've not used so far is a sap green. Now you can see the difference. This green looks more yellow, I would say more natural, more leaf colour. This one looks more blue-green, which doesn't look like a leaf colour, doesn't look that natural. So when we're talking about natural greens, I think we're looking at something like the sap green, how we can mix them. And also, what is a sap green from a point of view of the hues? How can we find a colour, or any colour if you're actually looking at it? When you're looking at a colour, how do you identify it? First of all, you have to identify it as belonging between one of those hues, or if you're lucky, it might be just one of those hues. And what I've put here, all the greens I've got here, I've got viridian green, emerald green, I've got a light green here, and lemon yellow, cadmium yellow, yellow ochre, burnt sienna I've put here as well, cadmium orange, light red, cadmium red, so that's vermilion, that's a light red, and this one is a cadmium red, rose madder, cobalt violet, and here I've got another purple, which is a mauve blue, blue mauve. So it's a bias towards blue, a purple towards blue, which is kind of important. I'll show you in a minute. And over the other side, if you get the ultramarine blue. I've got phthalo blue, and back to viridian green. So first of all, what we're going to try and do is just try to identify what a sap green is. First of all, how would we mix it? So if I just kind of rub in that, you can actually see the intensity of a sap green and how dark it is. It's a really beautiful colour. I love this colour. I actually used this colour myself for years ago. I was at art school. I got so into using it, I decided not to use it because I was using it for everything. But I'm coming back to it, and it's such a beautiful colour, and it's identifying where it is, and all the knowledge I've picked up over the years, and now I can go back to it and see why I liked it so much. And so if I try and mix it, I would use maybe colours out of side. I could guess it's somewhere in between the yellow green. I could try use it with two mixing. So if I go for yellow ochre, and it would be somewhere around here, and mix yellow ochre with the emerald green and see if I can get that colour. Now you can see it's the richness of that is greyer than that. So what you'll find is this colour is actually, even though it looks lighter than that, it's actually the richness of that is a dark pigment. It's almost like a rich hue. Let's just have a look at the other colours. So if you look at the light green, put that next to it, rub that in, and just see how that looks. A bit more. Use fingers. And if you look at that, really rub that in. It's quite opaque, that colour. It's hard to know when you first start painting, when you're a beginner, what do you mean by opaque and transparent? But you see this light green here, I would say it's an opaque colour. It's rubbing in, and when I rub it in, it's hard to see the colour through it. And you see what's the lovely thing about the sap green, it's a really transparent colour, and you can see very easily get the colour coming through. With this, I'm trying to rub it in, and it's getting really dry. Perhaps need a little bit of liquid with it, oil with it. But if I actually rub it in, it's going off my finger a bit more, I can see what's happening to the green. You see it's brighter, not too far off this colour. I mean, that could be just a darker version of that. So what if that's the case, when I if I darken that, I should get a sap green. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use the complementary colour of this colour. And what I've found by mixing earlier, I just found that this mauve colour, this mauve blue, gave me this fantastic dark green. That's a complement. I think the mauve is a complementary light green because you get a black. You see that? It's just getting lovely. It's going just a little bit, still a bit green. That means it's still on the green, so I add a bit more mauve with it. It should go black. Now, That black is lovely, and it shows that these two colours are opposite. So that's out positioning the this colour. We know where the complementary of that is that. And I'm going to try and do now is see if I can get the sap green by just adding more of this. So obviously the bias towards the black. Now again, it's brighter than this colour in the sense it's lighter, but the pigment itself, if I rub that in, it just looks to me like it's slightly either more cool colour, or it's actually just needs a little bit of lightening up. So what I can do is just add a little bit more of that with it, and then see what happens when that colour. That looks pretty good. I mean, see how bright that is, and see that that means this sap green is actually a much brighter pigment. It's the darkness of the pigment that actually makes it look like a really dark shade. But when we rub it in, you can see it gives you this really lovely transparent colour. But with the opaque colour, I'm finding it hard to get. But if I just rub that in there, you see it's the same colour, a similar, very, very similar colour. So the sap green, according to this mixing, is a shade of the light green, which then is, so the sap green itself is that kind of artificial yellow green. So, but because it's been darkened, it looks very beautiful and very natural. And so if we mix colours like that, similar, go across it, go darker, lighter, we'll get lots of greens from trees, or greens you see in grass, maybe slightly more. These kind of grass greens we've got here within that. So. We could get darker versions of it. I mean, I use the yellow ochre and the emerald green there. I got the colour. I could brighten it a bit more. I'm going to go for burnt sienna, and this time using the viridian green, and see if I can get a darker version of the sap. Now you can see just by rubbing that in, it's lovely rich colour you get that, but it's still too far over towards brown. So what I'm getting at the moment is almost like a dark yellow ochre. If I keep adding the viridian green, it should now move over towards like a sap green. You can see how dark that is. Now if I rub that in, it's much darker than getting up there. So I could lighten it. The thing is though, if I lighten it with that colour, I'm going to get the it's never going to get as bright as that. So I'm going to actually just lighten a little bit, but it should hit the sap green. So I'm lightening it a little bit, and then bring that in, rub that in. That looks pretty good. See, that's the sap green when it's lightened. That's another way of getting the sap green. But you can see the colour is brighter in the sense it's lighter, but it's the same intensity of that, because that's a dark pigment. It's hard to get your head around this, isn't it? Because something that looks so dark looks like a shade, but so a bit like ultramarine blue. Ultramarine blue is a colour that's very dark when you see it, but when you rub it in, you can see the brightness of the colour. It's a pure hue. This colour is not a pure hue, but it's more of a kind of shade that's going on. Looks more something like that if you did a light. In fact, when you can actually buy sap greens, and some sap greens actually are lighter, appear a bit like that. So again, you can see all these lovely colours I'm getting here. I'm getting some very natural colours. I can put a bit white with them, and that's a gorgeous kind of green. I'm getting that. If you put white with the sap green, and that again, you can see it's a lovely colour, very similar to the one I've mixed. So I'm mixing the same colour going across it. But again, it's really handy to know if you can identify where that is. And you can see the range of greens are getting now. I can slightly move over towards the yellow. Now, shades of yellow are natural greens. So if you go back to my channel, and look at the Great Artist Steel one, how to mix yellow. It's a similar thing. I'm just moving over towards yellow, and by mixing those yellows, I was actually perhaps using the same combinations, but I'm using more green, keeping the shade of yellow looking more natural, more of a natural green, and then but sap green just slightly moves over to yellow green, And like I say, it's just it's a different combinations using, but you're staying in this area of this kind of natural green. And so again, putting that, which is that's again burnt sienna with viridian green, and that's getting a lovely grey version of these. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that, everybody. I mean, just to see a range I've got there, just by focusing the sap green, slightly going over to one side, is really quite beautiful. And if you like your greens, it's identifying sap green, how it looks in relation to viridian green, and in relation to the yellows, and you're kind of getting to know your greens a bit more, which is really difficult. I know a lot of people, when they first start painting, the greens are perhaps the most difficult thing, but it's just a lot of the time you just can't expect something as strong as that light green to look so beautiful when it's greyed. So if you slightly darken it, put a bit of white with it, you get all these fantastic greens. So hope you enjoyed that, everybody, and enjoy mixing. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you again. Thanks very much, everyone. Bye.